Hi, and welcome back to the NFXL podcast. We're in mid-June now, so we're really in the doldrums between the end of last season and the beginning of the next. And I'm going to turn my attention in the next few podcasts to the fantasy version of NFL and give you my views on what to look for and what not to look for in the coming season. So we'll start by going through each of the key fantasy positions with the quarterbacks. So, some dynasty leagues may have already had their 2025 draft, but many others will be drafting in the coming weeks. For those yet to draft, these are my thoughts on who you should be looking to draft and who you should look to avoid, or are being rated too highly, in my opinion. For those that have already drafted, these thoughts can guide you as to how strong your roster may be and what players you could consider trading or trading away to try and strengthen your roster before the season starts. Um, these thoughts are based on the 2025 season alone and really on a half PPR standard scoring basis, just so it gives you an idea of the all round fantasy value of a player. But I won't go into the dynastic implications. You can work that out for yourself from the age and the team the players are on. But as I say, let's start with the quarterbacks. I've picked out four that I have in my top tier. And if you have one of these on your roster, you can be confident of getting consistent scoring from them pretty much week in, week out. Right, quick drink before we get into the top, as I say, the top tier, starting with Lamar Jackson of Baltimore. Um, he may not be quite the rushing phenom he was in his early years, and the arrival of Derek Henry has also reduced his fantasy production in that area. But he's still one of the top 4 or 5 rushing quarterbacks in the league, and that rushing value is invaluable in fantasy terms. On the flip side, the presence of Henry contributed to the passing game opening up for the Ravens and Jackson last season, which was his first 4,000-yard passing season, and also saw him throw a career high 41 TDs. So yin and yang for him. He may lose out to Henry in terms of rushing yardage, but he gets it back in passing side. He has pretty much the same array of receiving options open to him as he did last year, although the addition of DeAndre Hopkins may make it even better. So Jackson looks set for another big year through the air and on the ground, making him the best quarterback to have in fantasy terms for 2025, in my opinion. And I'm slightly distracted here. We're in the English summer, and I've got a wasp flying around in front of me. So bear with me. I'll try and keep going. Um, Josh Allen is next up from Buffalo. Amari Cooper and Mac Hollins have left the Bills this offseason. They contributed 675 yards and 7 TDs for the Bills last season and have been replaced by Josh Palmer and maybe Elijah Moore. Those two put up 1,122 yards and 2 TDs between them last season. I know Cooper was only in Buffalo for half a season, but on those numbers, Allen has not got a worse wide receiver core than last season at his disposal. And with Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox at tight end and the likes of Cook and Davis as chipping in as receiving backs, Allen has plenty of weaponry at his disposal again in 2025. He did have his first sub 4,000 passing yard season for 5 years last year, but may well get close to reaching that mark in 2025. He's certainly going to be up and around that mark. If he puts up his third consecutive double-digit rushing TD season and his normal 500 yards plus on the ground, he will once again be a great starting fantasy quarterback to have on your roster. So, two established guys there. Third up, we get to the sensation from last year, Jayden Daniels for the Commanders. Um, so, now, there is normally a concern over second season slumps as teams adapt defensively to tendencies not noticed during a rookie season. Teams go away, look at films, analyse these players much more, see them as much more of a threat, which they certainly should do in Daniel's case, and that can lead to the quarterback then having to adjust to that adjustment, if you see what I'm saying. So, whilst that concern cannot be completely ignored, I really don't see it applying to Daniels. Um, And these are some of the reasons. He's got Laramie Tunsil now at left tackle and Deebo Samuel at wide receiver. So Daniels has better protection and an improved receiver core at his disposal. So he for me, he has a shot at improving on that sensational rookie campaign of 3,568 passing yards and 25 passing TDs. Add on his undoubted prowess as a runner, 891 yards and 6 TDs last season, and you can rely on him being one of the highest scoring quarterbacks on a weekly basis. I really wouldn't worry about the second season slump. He had 11 games of 20 plus fantasy points in standard scoring last season, and that will go a long way to getting you a win in those 11 weeks. So, if you think it's, you know, that's 11 weeks where you're going to get good scores from him. So the final one in this top group is last year's Super Bowl MVP, Jalen Hurts. He actually had a down year passing wise last season, sub 3,000 passing yards and less than 20 touchdowns, was below his normal levels of previous seasons. And those numbers alone would say, why do I want him as a fantasy quarterback? He was not helped by star receivers AJ Brown and Devonta Smith, missing a combined 8 regular season games, though. With the same cast back and probably healthier in 2025, he should go back to the normal passing numbers of previous seasons. A bit like Jackson in Baltimore, he's had a star running back arrive there, but despite the arrival of Saquon Barkley, he was still just as effective on the ground last season. He recorded over 600 rushing yards for the fourth year running, and he's averaging 13 rushing TDs across those 4 years. So he's, the brotherly shove, obviously, the controversial now, brotherly shove. Personally, I don't like it and would like it seen out the game, but it's there, so Hurts is going to benefit from it. As with the others in this top group, they all pose that dual threat big time that makes them fantasy gold to own. So if you're talking about Hurts, Daniels, Allen, and Jackson, they can pass and they can run, and it's the running side in fantasy that is of huge value. It's big point scoring time. So they're the 4 that if you've got them on your roster, brilliant. If you're about to draft, they're the ones you should be trying to get first and foremost. So let's have a look at the next 6 after a quick drink. These are the guys I see as being really solid starting fantasy quarterbacks in 2025, but maybe not putting up the really big scores at the top 4. They will do on some weeks, but not as consistently, I wouldn't say. And we're going to start with Baker Mayfield in Tampa Bay. Now, Mayfield's topped 4,000 yards passing in both his 2 seasons in Tampa, and last season blew all of our minds with 41 passing touchdowns. And when you consider that Mike Evans and Chris Godwin played in just 21 games between them last season, that makes those numbers even more noteworthy. And now they give him the leading slot receiver from the 2025 draft class in Emeka Egbuka to go with it. And Jalen McMillan did really well for him in the first year, covering for Evans and Goodwin's absence. So he's full of weaponry at wide receiver. Yes, he throws too many interceptions, and that is bad in the real world, but in fantasy world, does little to hurt his scoring power. He may not be the dual threat of the leading quarterbacks, but he should put up really big passing numbers again in 2025 and be a good starter for you in fantasy. Similarly, the next guy up, Joe Burrow for Cincinnati, arguably the best passing quarterback in the league. He certainly is statistically. The guy's averaged 275 passing yards a game across 5 years in the league and thrown for 34 or more TDs in 3 of those 5 seasons. In the other 2 seasons, he missed time though, which is something you don't want to see from a quarterback you have drafted early in fantasy world. And he continues to get sacked a lot, 48 times last season. But that is the only downside on Burrow. When he plays, he's just going to score because he's a quality passer, quality receivers. Enough said. And with that same cast in place, receiving wise in 2025, Burrow will put up huge passing numbers again. He just needs to avoid getting hurt. With his backup not being in the same universe as Burrow talent wise, handcuffing is not really an option here. You go with Burrow and you try and find, if he gets hurt, then you have to find a plan B. Right, next one up. essentially a rookie, J.J. McCarthy out of Minnesota, or for playing for Minnesota. Um, Missed all of last season, but he inherits one of the most dynamic arrays of receivers in Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and T.J. Hockenson. If Jefferson has another 1,500 receiving yard and 10 TD season, Addison gets close to 1,000 yards and 9 TDs, and Hockenson gets around 700 yards and 5 TDs. That means whoever is chucking the rock in their direction has 3,200 passing yards and 24 TDs from those three alone. So really doesn't matter who's a quarterback. You're going to put up numbers. Right now, McCarthy is going to be the man in that position. He's going to get the start. And they'll give him a pretty long reign, I think, because they need to see just what they've got with him. So we've talked about those three, and then we can add on contributions from the likes of Aaron Jones, Jalen Naylor, Rondale Moore, and possibly rookie Ty Felton, depending how he pans out. Those guys might have another 1,000 yards and 7 to 8 TDs in them. So that Minnesota's starting quarterback could be expected to push north of 3,500 passing yards and 30 plus TDs. Judged on his college career, we should not expect any significant numbers on the ground from McCarthy, though. There is a risk in trusting a rookie to produce at those levels. I mean, that risk is pretty high. So if you're like me, you consider going early for McCarthy. A late round handcuff addition of his backup, Sam Howell, could be a good idea because, like I say, whoever's got those receivers at their disposal is going to give you good numbers. So that would apply to Howell too if he came in at any point. Right, next up, Kyler Murray, Arizona. Now, some of you may have heard my previous thoughts on Kyle Murray and they're a bit skeptical. So you may be surprised to see his name high on this list, but this is fantasy world, not the real world. So let's bear that in mind. Murray has never had a 4,000-yard passing season, but was not far off it last season. And with possible improvement to come from both Marvin Harrison Jr. and Michael Wilson, he may go close to reaching the 4,000-yard mark in 2025. He's also averaged over 30 rushing yards a game throughout his time in the NFL, meaning around 500 rushing yards and 5 rushing TDs is achievable for him on the ground too. All of which, for me, make him a better fantasy option than a real-world option. Conversely, the next guy, Patrick Mahomes, Kansas City, the best quarterback of his generation, is only 9th on my list. As I say, this is like Murray in reverse. This is fantasy, not the real world. Yes, last season with his first sub 4,000 passing season, apart from his one game rookie season, but he has failed to get 30 passing TDs in either of his last 2 seasons. The downturn in yardage is down to the Chiefs' death by 1,000 cuts offense, which does not feature elite wide receivers, but plenty of capable ones. And with the legend that is Travis Kelce seeing his powers and numbers wane, Mahomes' numbers are still really good considering what he has to work with. He will hope to see far more of his best 2 receivers, Rashee Rice and Hollywood Brown, in 2025, which will help. But Kelce's numbers look likely to continue to diminish as Father Time takes a firm grip on him. And whilst Mahomes shows flashes as a runner, history tells us not to expect more than 300 to 350 rushing yards and a couple of TDs. So he needs to be seen as pretty much a passing quarterback fantasy-wise. Around 4,000 yards and less than 30 TDs might be what we see from Mahomes' passing efforts in 2025. So he's going to be a solid fantasy quarterback, but not a top one. Have a quick drink before I go on to a really risky option. Risky option, but one that will score when he plays. And that's Tua Tagovailoa of Miami. His fantasy value literally comes with a health warning. In the 41 games he has played over the last 3 seasons, he averages nearly 270 passing yards a game. So in games he starts, he has plenty of fantasy value. But the fact he's missed 10 games across those 3 seasons is the reason his fantasy value comes with an asterisk, so to speak. And due to his concussion history, he's basically only going to run when nobody is in the same county as him. If he could play a full season, he could well be a 4,500 passing yards and 30 TD a season quarterback. So the upside is huge, but comes with risk. So taking him means maybe handcuffing later on in your draft with Zach Wilson, and also drafting another decent starting option as insurance against Tua going down again. So you've got to have a 2 or 3 layered plan if you plan on taking Tua. But if you do take him early, if he manages to stay healthy, he could be huge for you this season. Right, let's give you 7 more to consider as fantasy starters. Most fantasy leagues are 12-team leagues, so only 3 of these 7 would be starters in those leagues for me. By definition, then they are borderline starting fantasy quarterbacks. In 2 quarterback or flex leagues, all of these would make the grade though. That starts with Brock Purdy. On the basis of last season, Purdy should go close for 4,000 yards in 2025. But with the recovery from an ACL clouding the availability of Brandon Ayuk and the departure of Deebo Samuel, is likely to struggle to top the 3,864 he had last season, where he passed for just 20 touchdowns. Like I said, they should go close theoretically, but there's reasons to think he could struggle. And he's now got to show he's worth that big contract, and that's a different type of pressure as well. We'll move on to Caleb Williams of Chicago. Williams passed for 3,500 yards in his rookie season, and with a much improved O-line to protect him, and the addition of Luther Burden and Colston Loveland, he should be set to improve on that in 2025. He rushed for just shy of 500 yards last season, but without a TD on the ground to his name. He did have double-digit rushing TDs in his last 2 seasons at USC. So behind the reinforced O-line, he could definitely do better on the ground, certainly in the touchdown department as well. A bit more drink. The wasp's gone away, by the way, so we're safe. Right, here's another one that you might have to adapt a certain approach to, and that's the Indianapolis Colts quarterback. Combination of the 2, Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones. I've named both for 2 reasons. First, we do not know who will be the Colts' Week 1 starter, and secondly, whoever it is, they are far from certain to retain that role for the whole season. But if you can get both on your roster, whoever plays each week for the Colts has a talented young set of receivers as last season, plus Tyler Warren, who I see as a real game changer. So between them, they should comfortably exceed the 3,361 passing yards and 20 touchdowns the Colts had last season as a team. And with both, especially Richardson, being so productive on the ground, these could be a dynamic duo fantasy-wise, a bit Batman and Robin. You decide which one's which. But they could certainly deliver a punch in fantasy terms. Then we go on to Drake May of New England. May had much fanfare last season, but actually only averaged 175 passing yards a game, which equates to around 3,000 yards in a season. Pretty modest. But this is a different New England this season. They have significantly upgraded across their roster, and that includes at wide receiver in the shape of Stephon Diggs, Mac Hollins, and Kyle Washington. So May should be able to capitalise on those new additions, and behind a much improved O-line, push north of 3,500 yards. Like Caleb Williams, he put up better numbers on the ground in college, so he could do so again behind an improved Pats O-line. Then we come to another rookie who had a great first season, Bo Nix in Denver. 3,775 passing yards and 29 passing TDs alongside 30 yards on the ground and 4 TDs per he's basically delivered on all fronts in his rookie season, more than could have possibly been expected, even though I drafted him in fantasy last year. That would put him in a similar territory to Williams and May, but many expect him to improve on those numbers. But with a similar array of receivers at his disposal and an upgraded rush attack in the form of J.K. Dobbins and R.J. Harvey now in Denver, the passing numbers could suffer as the running back committee takes its share of the pie on offense. So don't necessarily expect the Knicks to push north of what he did last year, but even if he just did what he did last year, that's going to make him pretty useful in fantasy terms. And we come on to Jared Goff in Detroit. He's a pass-only quarterback fantasy-wise, as he offers little on the ground. However, he has thrown for around 4,500 yards in each of his last 3 seasons and averaged 32 passing TDs in those seasons. He can be expected to be in the same area in 2025, but that lack of ground production hurts his fantasy value. But he's still going to put up some good numbers. Then we come to the last one in this section, CJ Stroud in Houston. His numbers regressed from a strong rookie season in 2023 to go under the 4,000 yard mark in 2024. Part of that was down to Stroud, but part of it was down to a poor protection from his O-line. The Texans seem to have addressed those O-line issues this off-season, and Stroud will have learned from last season. So I am anticipating him going north of 4,000 yards in 2025. So that's the end of that section, that tier, if you like. The next tier, I've sort of given a title, if you like, of big names to avoid. That means the big names, you might have big expectations of them. They might not deliver to those big expectations. That doesn't mean that particularly in two quarterback leagues, they're still going to be pretty good to have as your second quarterback. And we'll start with Justin Herbert for the Chargers. His passing yards per game in the last 3 seasons have been on the slide from 278.8 per game to 241.1 and then to 227.6 last season. So that's a huge drop off in that period of time. And that's down to Coach Harbaugh sticking to his well-known modus operandi, pounding it on the ground. And he's going to do that again this season in the shape of Najee Harris and Omarion Hampton. And outside of Ladd McConkey, the Chargers do not have a lot of passing weaponry. So I think Herbert's numbers could struggle again passing wise, and he's pretty much a pass only quarterback. So, low end fantasy quarterback for me. Next one up, Dak Prescott. The addition of George Pickens should improve the Cowboys' passing attack, but his ground numbers have all but vanished in recent seasons. And I still do not see his passing numbers returning to the highs of 2023. Trevor Lawrence, Jacksonville. First overall pick, highly talented, a generational talent. He's only, inverted commas, averaged over 250 passing yards a game once in his NFL career to date. And that was only by a whisker in the 2023 season. But now with Travis Hunter added to Brian Thomas as a strong young 1-2 punch at wide receiver, there's a chance he goes higher, but that is partly offset by the loss of Evan Engram at tight end. So really, I'm not buying into Lawrence having a big year in 2025. He'll probably have a reasonable year, but not a big one. Matt Stafford, LA Rams, is not passed for 4,000 yards in a season for the last 3 seasons, and fantasy-wise has always been completely dependent on his big passing numbers. Now, as one of my former colleagues said to me, I should refer to Matt Stafford as future Hall of Famer Matt Stafford. I'll give it the possible future Hall of Famer Matt Stafford for his exceptional passing ability. But I'll move on from that. Devontae Adams for Cooper Kupp. That may help in regard of his passing yardage. But if he does get above 4,000 yards, it won't be by much. So I do not see him as as QB1 in fantasy terms for 2025. So then the final one in this section, Jordan Love, Green Bay. He's averaged around 235 passing yards for the last 2 seasons in Green Bay. For a full season, that would make him close to the 4,000 yard mark, and he will certainly not be short of receiving options this coming season, as they've drafted a couple of wide receivers to add to what was already a pretty full room, and now they're even talking about turning wide receivers into cornerbacks because it's overloaded. But with limited value as a rushing quarterback, that makes Love a low-end quarterback too in fantasy terms. So I'll try and quickly go through the rest, but I'm sort of keen to keep the time of these down to a certain amount. But here we go. Michael Penix. In a small sample, Penix averaged 258 passing yards a game and had 4 passing TDs in those 3 games. The Falcons as a team averaged 239 passing yards a game and had only 21 passing TDs all season. With basically the same cast in place, Penix as a pass-only fantasy quarterback offers little value in fantasy terms for the 2025 season, but he may have value in dynasty leagues. Bryce Young in Carolina. Young averages under 200 passing yards a game in the NFL and under a TD game in his 2 seasons with Carolina. His 249 yards and 6 TDs on the ground from last season help his fantasy value, but until those passing numbers improve significantly, his fantasy value is low. Then whoever starts in Cleveland is either going to be an aging subpar option, a retread, or a speculative rookie. And even then, whoever gets the starting job will have the other three waiting to take over if they do not play well on a team as that was one of the worst passing offenses in the league last season. There's just no upside in it for me. You may, if you really wanted to take a punt on somebody, you could say Shedder Sanders dynasty wise, but the rest just not worth bothering with. Geno Smith, after 8 anonymous fantasy years in the NFL, Smith put up good numbers in the last 3 seasons in Seattle, but do not get drawn in by those numbers where he averaged 250 passing yards and about 1.5 passing TDs a game. As I've said in a previous pod, aging veterans moving to new teams needed a loaded roster to succeed, and Smith won't be getting that for the Raiders, so pass on Smith. Tyler Shugg. I like Shugg, but he is a rookie on a team that ranked 21st for passing offense last season. They should improve on that with Olave and Shaheed back to full health, but as a quarterback who does not do a lot on the ground, Shugg is a low fantasy value in annual leagues, may have some value dynasty-wise. The Giants, Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, Jackson Dart, you're kind of in the same situation as Cleveland. All three may get a crack at starting behind the Giants O-line, which is a bit like playing NFL Russian roulette in terms of the times you're going to get hit. Giants quarterbacks got sacked 48 times last season and endured well over 100 hits. That resulted in them averaging under a passing TD a game and under 200 passing yards a game. Dart may be worth taking a chance on in dynasty leagues, but you may have to wait till beyond 2025. That's for that investment to pay off. Now, I'm going to skip the rest basically because I'm running out of time, but I will just say that Justin Fields, Aaron Rodgers, Sam Darnold, and Cam Ward are all not for me. Cam Ward may do well longer term. Sam Darnold goes from a strong receiving core to a poor receiving core. Aaron Rodgers, he hadn't got a great lot to work with in Pittsburgh, but outside of DK Metcalf, and he's had his 2 lowest passing yards a game seasons in 2022 for Green Bay and last year. So the evidence is all there for you to see. Justin Fields is not a starting NFL quarterback for me. Yeah, he does stuff on the ground, but he's got to be vulnerable to losing that job. So he won't be for me either. As I said, Cam Ward, his dynasty value is going to depend on what the Titans give him at receiver. And he didn't do a lot on the ground in college, but if you draft him, you're really doing it for dynasty purposes. Don't expect to get much out of him in 2025 for me. Right, that's fantasy quarterbacks. So next, I need a quick drink. And a cough. Next, I'll be back with running backs. But they're my thoughts on what you should do in terms of fantasy quarterbacks for 2025. So I'll see you with the next one when I talk running backs. Bye for now.